The Israeli demands for the release of so-called hostages, and the other demand is by the UN that demands the release of those hostages, quote unquote, without any condition. And the third scene that comes to mind is the American universities who are uprising against the genocide. Those might be regular scenes for some, but they unveil and expose the Western hypocrisy upon which world order and even the educational system is based. We have heard not a single Western official calling for the release of Palestinian prisoners, not even those who no, it's too far. Who are given only administrative sentences, although it or are detained under administrative conditions, and although these run contrary to human rights. These organizations, international organizations, have not been set to help populations that are seeking to liberate themselves or gain their freedom, but rather to reinforce colonial orders. While the third scene indicates the partiality and lack of impartiality on the part of Western academia. And that's why some maniacs talk about the violations committed against American students as though they are achievements and they are applauded. If I may call the Al-Aqsa flood by another name, it would be called the flood of liberating the prisoners. And by prisoners, I don't only mean the Palestinian prisoners, but those who are imprisoned in their minds and mindsets, who still believe in the Western order, Western and international organizations. The Aqsa flood has exposed the Zionist propaganda and shown its real face. And that's why this flood of liberation, we may call it the flood of liberation and values, which is represented best by the prisoners who have sacrificed their freedom and their lives for their cause and their homelands. Today, we discuss exactly that with our guests. We start with Mr. Osama Al Ghul, the director of the International Organization for the Solidarity with Prisoners, and he is going to provide us with a paper on the experience of prisoners, and also Mr. Ashraf Nasrallah, the head of the International Justice Forum Against Genocide, and he's going to look at this issue from a legal human rights perspective. And finally, Dr. Sami Al-Arian, who is going to talk about the political aspects of the prisoners' issues. And finally, each speaker is going to have between 18 to, the microphone is muted, between 18 to 20 minutes. ميكروفون المتحدث مغلق. The speaker's microphone is off. Hello, please unmute the mic. The second point, we talk about the 7th of October as a turning point, meaning that the severity of the violations that are systematically applied to prisoners, Palestinian prisoners post the 7th of October, those who were detained before that are considered non-prisoners at all, because now those prisoners have been turned into complete hell, and have the Israelis have taken off all their pledges and commitments and deprive towards the human rights organizations, and they have deprived the prisoners of any communication, sometimes even water and electricity, and blocked lawyers, families, or ICRC visits, let alone, of course, the deprivation of education or collective prayers since the beginning of the Aqsa flood, which means they have not been able to pray collectively since the 7th of October. Today, we have more than 9,000 prisoners, including 3,000 are administrative detention, including children and women, 19 women. Since the 7th of October, we have 17,000 cases of detention, or 17,000 rather, meaning 17,000 have been imprisoned until today, but some have been released, and those who remain are more than 9,000. And this is only from the West Bank and Jerusalem, and does not include those from other places who are estimated to be at in the thousands. In terms of violations, the Israeli violations against Palestinian prisoners have escalated in an unprecedented manner. International and Palestinian human rights organizations have documented violations that are tantamount to war crimes and crimes against humanity, including medical negligence that is shameful. We have 700 patients in prison who require immediate medical attention, and that's why many Palestinian and international human rights organizations have communicated with the Israeli authorities, including the Médecins Sans Frontières, but they have been denied. And also torture. There are so many violations, and too many actually to be counted and listed. But I will give you some examples. It's being applied systematically. So they have lots, so to speak, of beatings every day with the intention of breaking or incurring fractions to ribs, for example. So the prisoners have gone back to the situation they were in before 1967, which means we have undone all the achievements for human rights of prisoners since 1967. Unfortunately, there is zero rights for prisoners now, and they are only treated by batons and severe beatings, including also solitary confinement, including that of Ahmed Manasra, who was detained at the age of 13 and who was released after 9 years of detention in a miserable psychological condition 2 weeks ago. Also, Israelis have used Palestinian prisoners in Israeli prisons as human shields. According to some testimonies, those prisoners from Jerusalem and the West Bank, some were taken to the Gaza Strip in order to verify that places that are to be broken into by the Israeli army are free of any combatants or resistance. So when there is a confrontation, they will be the first victims. And also in terms of torture and sexual violence, there are many cases, particularly among Palestinian young men and also young women. Not many young women are coming out because of the sensitivity of this issue, but I'm going to talk about some of those sexual violations. On the 12th of March this year, Kifaya, who is a lawyer in the Women Guidance Center, offered a statement in the Human Rights Council in Geneva about violations against Palestinian women at Israeli checkpoints, and she detailed the violations, and it is on record. There is also the deprivation of the visits of the family, and that's not all. Since the 7th of October, they have been denied of any visits that of families, lawyers, or ICRC teams. Only recently have the lawyers of Al Damir institution and the prisoners institution and Al Mizan have started to have access to their clients. And as I mentioned, also, we have more than 3,000 cases of administrative detention, which are constantly renewed, which means that although by the law they can only be detained for 6 months under administrative detention, but at the end of the 6 months they are renewed to a further 1 year, and so 1.5 and 2 years, etc. And this means that they are arrested and they are taken to the intelligence branches and are kept under administrative detention. We have another form of imprisonment, which is the house arrest, and also the detention, so to speak, of dead bodies whom the occupation refuses to hand over in order to use in swaps and exchange and prisoner exchanges. In terms of enforced disappearance, we have more than 4,000 enforced disappearance cases, according to Al Mizan organization in a former statement, and a Hamukade organization, which is an Israeli human rights organization, have acknowledged 1,750 cases of enforced disappearance. Those are documented by the Israelis. The others are not documented. Why are they not documented? Because we deal with two sides. There are the prisons and the civil the civil prisons, but there are also the military camps where there are prisons. So our information is really received from the management or the Department of Prisons in Israeli, and not all the prisoners' numbers are disclosed in those figures. Another Israeli human rights organization issued a report saying, "Welcome in Hell." It was tackled the inhumane treatment of Palestinian prisoners in Israeli prisons after 7th of October. And during that time, most of the prisoners have not been put to trial, and the report shows quick shift in the condition of 12 prisons and detention centers into which have turned into torture camps. And this is a quote from B'Tselem in their report called "Welcome in Hell" or "Welcome to Hell." No, it's muted. In August 2024, also there was another statement indicating sexual violations that are said to be only the tip of the iceberg in torture practices. And as I said, there are 65 cases of death cases due to medical negligence, in addition to torture during interrogation in Israeli prisons. Under support and assistance mechanisms, the international organization established a website for solidarity in order to document the cases in details, and also allows former prisoners to apply or start a lawsuit and provide their testimonies, and also providing all the documents for the ICC. It's muted again. Okay. This is all I'm going to talk about in this context. There are other parts, of course, with regards to awareness raising, political and diplomatic support, addressing international human rights organizations like Human Rights Watch, the ICRC, etc. So we send monthly statements or updates to those organizations to keep them abreast, and we have also intervened over a video conference to the Human Rights Council in Geneva we talked for 5 minutes, which was the only slot we were given to talk about the prisoners in Palestinian prisoners in Israeli prisons. And we seek also to raise awareness in Arab and international states and international organizations. Thank you so much for giving me this time.
It was not easy for Muhammad to tell me how the rape is taking place, but there are so many things that are done. For example, using objects like any objects that are used in the anus of the to penetrate the anus of the prisoner in the camp. There was rape by injecting a material or a matter inside the anus of the prisoner. Until now, those prisoners are not allowed to be visited by the Red Cross. The Red Cross is unable to visit any Palestinian prisoner. Now we will move to the second paper. In the name of God, dear audience, each individual with their title, peace be upon you all. The legal aspects of the issue of prisoners in the Israeli prisons. The issue of Palestinian prisoners in the prisons of the Israeli occupation is one of the most striking aspects of the violations of the international humanitarian law and international human rights law, because the occupation is following or pursuing systematic violations in terms including physical and psychological ill treatment, torture, and the lack of medical attention, which puts these practices in contradiction with international conventions and agreements. Since the beginning of the attacks, since the 7th of October 2023 against Gaza, the Israeli occupation has been targeting all groups of the Palestinian community, whether in Jerusalem or West Bank or the Arab lands of 1948 or inside the Gaza Strip. And these arrests have targeted thousands of detainees, including 200 women and children, as well as Palestinian workers who have been working inside the Palestinian territories. Those detentions have shown unprecedented levels of atrocity and brutality, including the killing of dozens of detainees. Since the 7th of October 2023 up till today, the Israeli entity have issued 32 laws and 77 executive orders that are directly linked with the Palestinian prisoners in Israeli prisons. So now there is a new categorization of prisoners, which is called the illegal fighter or combatant. In 12 December 2023, the occupation amended the law of the illegal combatants, and those amendments were very critical and as a sign to the difficult situation the Palestinian prisoners are facing in Israeli prisons. Some of those amendments had to do with the time spent by spent in the prison. So, for example, there was an executive order from that for the detention of the Palestinian from 72 hours to 90 days. Also, also it increased the detention period without showing or presenting to a judge from 14 days to 72 days, and then from also for 6 months the lawyer is not allowed to visit the detainee in Israeli prison. In addition to that, when the detainee is allowed to see a judge, so this is conducted through a video conference rather than a physical interview, absence of a lawyer. What is the meaning of those amendments in the law? These amendments mean that the occupation is capable of hiding or disappearing any civilian from Gaza Strip or any other place for 45 days without knowing their fate, the conditions of their detention, or what they are facing, or the torture they are going through in the prisons. Even if they were killed under torture, very simply, the occupation can deny that this person was detained by them. Another important point, after the 7th of October, which is the denial of the Israeli occupation of those detained by them as prisoners of war, and they are used as, or they are called illegal combatants. And this is against the Geneva Conventions. So the detainees can be denied of their rights. Those rights that are already denied by the Israeli occupation even before the 7th of October, and very rarely did it adhere to these rights. The occupation did not only prevent lawyers to visit the detainees, but also international organizations are denied these visits, on top of which is the Red Cross. So they are not allowed to visit or see any of the detainees, especially those who are detained from Gaza Strip. These signs and indicators show very clearly how dangerous the situation is and how immoral the situation is in the Israeli prisons, especially when we see that those who were killed in this period after the 7th of October, more than 65 detainees were killed under torture. And some of those, some of them are doctors. Until now, 3 doctors are announced dead, killed under torture by the Israeli occupation. They are Adnan al-Burj, Yad al-Rantisi, and Ziad al-Dalu. And their dead bodies are still held by the occupation, and they are not allowing those bodies to be delivered or to hand it over or to be to undergo autopsy to know the reason of their death. And everybody knows that they died under torture or they were killed under torture during the interrogation. I will also talk about torture in prisons, and this is a very a huge issue there is no single detainee who is imprisoned by the Israelis who is not going out and saying and talking about the horrors of torture. And no matter what we say, it cannot describe the horrors of the practices that are taking place in those Nazi prisons. As for the crime of torture and the criminal responsibility for torture, any individual who undertakes this practice or orders it or collide in this crime should be held accountable. And in a while, I'm going to talk about the collusion of the Israeli judiciary in hiding these crimes since the 7th of October. As for the steps that are taken inside those prisons, despite the hard living conditions in those prisons, prisoners are not allowed to have clothes or to have any radio or television, and this means that they are kept away from the outside world. So many prisoners who were taken from the Gaza Strip, their close family were killed in Gaza, and they didn't know about that until they were released from prison months after their detention. Also, as my colleague said, in terms of the sexual violence that is practiced heavily, and it is very degrading from the human values. I can't imagine a human being doing this against any prisoners that are held by them. So the sexual violence that is practiced against male and female prisoners is unprecedented, and this is something that should be exposed and told to the international community in order to hold the criminals accountable. And on top of those criminals is the Ben Ghafir, the Minister of Interior, because he is the one who is bragging that he is ordering the deprivation of those prisoners from food, water, sleeping, clothes, and the basic rights. And all those who are in charge of the prisons, they are considered taking part in those crimes of torture. Now I'm going to move to the role of the Israeli judiciary, which Israel brags that they have judiciary. The judiciary is colliding in hiding those crimes. Since this atrocity war or genocidal war, there have been several appeals to the highest court in Israel to stop the crimes of torture. And the response of the court was to reject those pleas, which means that the judiciary gives legitimacy to those practices against the prisons despite its knowledge about what is taking place in the prison. So there is collusion, and this means that the judges are also involved in the crimes of torture against prisoners in the Israeli prisons. In terms of torture, I'm going to talk about one case, which is the case of Dr. Iyad Rantisi. Dr. Iyad Rantisi is a Palestinian doctor. He was displaced from Gaza city to the south, and when he reached the Netzarim checkpoint, the occupation on the 10th of November detained him, and he was with his family. Then he was transferred to the prisons controlled by the military, the Israeli military, and their family didn't know anything about him or where he was being held. For 6 months, nobody knew anything about him. Neither his wife or relatives or kids, they didn't know where he was held. Until one day, after 6 months, everybody was surprised that the Haaretz newspaper announced that Iyad Rantisi, the Palestinian doctor, was killed under torture, and and that happened 1 week after his detention. So during interrogation, after 7 days, Iyad Rantisi was killed in prison under torture. Now, after this crime, the most dangerous crime is the collusion of the Israeli judiciary to hide this crime. So after the killing of this doctor, there was an order given to the Israeli judge not to produce any news about this crime. So the judge issued an order not to publish as any piece of information about this crime or about the killing of this person in a prison for 6 months. And this is a collusion and complicity by the Israeli judiciary in this crime that has been perpetrated against a Palestinian doctor. And by the way, until now, the dead body of that doctor is still held by the Israelis, and and it hasn't been handed over to his family. We hear that the Israeli Ministry of Justice and the Department of Detention Centers is conducting an investigation, but there are no results yet, and we don't trust these investigations because they are only made as a formality, and this is just to prevent holding those criminals to account in front before international courts. But that doesn't mean that we will give up, and we are going to keep pushing for holding those criminals accountable. There is another important point, which is the holding the dead bodies of those prisoners. So they detain them, they kill them under torture, and they don't give the dead body to their families. For example, Dr. Adnan al-Burj, he was detained from the hospital, he was killed in a prison, and his family submitted several pleas to be handed over the dead body, but the occupation is refusing to do that. And by the way, even when he was detained, we sent a lawyer several times to visit him, and they said that there is an order to prevent this visit. And we were surprised the last time that he was killed in a prison, and at the time, the lawyer was told that he is not allowed to visit the prison. Now, this is another phenomenon that is taking place, which is holding the dead bodies of those who are imprisoned by the Israelis. So all of those who were detained after the 7th of October, their dead bodies are not handed over to their families. Why? Because if those dead bodies are handed over, they will undergo autopsy, and the torture will appear, and those crimes will be exposed to the world. So they want to hide this crime from the world. In this regard, and holding the dead bodies of the prisoners, this is against the Geneva Conventions, because the Geneva Convention says that the families have the right to bury their detained loved one, and this is against Article 132, and this is also in contradiction with the additional protocol of which talks about the respect of the dead bodies and handing them over to their families upon their request. So holding those dead bodies is one form of the collective punishment for families. And this is also prescribed in the international law. Of course, the Israeli occupation now is using the British emergency law of 1945 to justify its practices that are entirely against the international law. And today there is a very clear complicity by the Israeli judiciary. I am focusing here that there is very clear collusion by the Israeli judiciary and by the highest court of this occupation about the crimes of torture that is taking place against Palestinian prisoners, especially doctors, children, and women. There are several violations that we see in the courts today. First of all the Israeli courts lack the simplest aspect of acceptable standards of free trial. And they lack independence due process. It is 99% of the cases will be found guilty in those courts, because those courts always take into account the narrative of the Al-Shabak or the internal security agencies. We have also trials against the children. We have dozens of children who are held in Israeli prisons, and Israel is the only country in the world that is holding children on trial before military courts, not before civil courts. And this is something that should be stopped. Now I will move to the recommendations. First of all, the crimes of torture and the inhumane practices that the Palestinian prisoners are facing in the Israeli prisons should stop. Number two, international investigations should open and hold those who are conducting torture, ordering them, or participating in them should be held to account. Three, the occupation should announce the names of the Palestinian prisoners who are held in Israeli prisons. Four, the Israeli occupation should allow international organizations, especially the International Committee of the Red Cross, to visit all Israeli prisons and detention centers that are affiliated with the Israeli army. Five, all the political relations, economic relations, or trade relations should be stopped with the Israeli occupation until this occupation is over. Number six, the immediate and unconditional release of all the dead bodies of the prisoners that are still held by the Israelis. Number seven, allowing the families of the dead prisoners to be buried. And finally, we demand everyone not to participate in any activity that is organized by the Israeli embassies in any place in the world, because this means that they are in support of the genocide that is taking place against Gaza and against Palestinians. Thank you very much.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. First of all, I would like to thank my predecessors, the other speakers, for their interventions about the situation of prisoners in the Arab-Israeli conflict. It's heartbreaking to see that this situation persists for decades rather than mere few years. Some theorists, whether in conflicts such as Afghanistan, talking about background, or Iraq, they lasted for a period of time where those violations took place, and then the international community acted, investigated, and stopped and even put to trial some of those responsible for those atrocities. In one way or another, there was some sort of condemnation. What happens in Palestine, however, is quite the contrary. We have a Zionist attitude that actually brags of those practices. Those are practices which our speakers talked about in relation to Palestinian prisoners have not been or did not emerge in a year or two. They are a deliberate policy. They are a persistent practice that has persisted for decades. that started even before the establishment of the Israeli state. Under the British mandate, those practices were used in order to break the will of the Palestinian people, to stop resisting their occupation and to expel them from their own land. So this practice is part and parcel of the attempt to break the will of the Palestinians. And it has not changed much, but has only escalated in severity. We are talking about an Israeli occupation of the Palestinian territories that has imprisoned more than 1 million people, Palestinians. Even at a mere quantitative level, it is enormous and absolutely abhorring to see that the world witnesses all those practices and does nothing. The Zionist movement at heart is a colonial occupation that wants to uproot the Palestinian people and replace it with its own. So those practices are part of this attack that is trying to expel the Palestinian people from their own land in order to establish what they call the Greater Israel. So the question of Palestinian prisoners is not just a matter of reciprocity or reaction of or a revengeful reaction. It is rather continuous persisting practice since the beginning of the occupation, be it in at the beginning against the Arabs of 1948 who stayed under military control or military authority for 18 years. And then in 1967, we started to have a systematic practice and laws that make a difference between the practices for the citizens and those the West Bank and Jerusalem. What we see in, or Gaza, sorry, what we see in the Aqsa flood was a very normal reaction to those practices. When this government came to power in early 2023, its policies were very clear in the West Bank in terms of the expansion and increase of settlements, and which Smotrich is overlooking right now, or with regards to Jerusalem and prisoners, of which Ben Ghafir is responsible. And we're talking here about the most extreme fascist and Nazi of all parties and individuals. This is what the Palestinian people are being subjected to. So the Aqsa flood came as a normal and appropriate reaction to those behaviors and practices. There were at least 5 causes for the Aqsa flood. One in related to settlement and the annexation of the West Bank, and the attempt to commit violations and aggressions against the Palestinians in the West Bank, in addition to the Judaization of the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and these consecutive and escalating violations of the sanctity of Al-Aqsa Mosque in order to hasten what they call the Solomon Temple rebuilding, in addition to a general attempt to let go of the so-called Palestinian cause in order to introduce normalization between Israel and Arab regimes such and other Muslim states such as Pakistan and Saudi Arabia. This was what the Palestinians were looking at when Al-Aqsa flood came. But the situation of prisoners in prison is also was a major motive, because with the advent of Ben Ghafir, all the rights that the Palestinian prisoners have won through struggling for years, such as the right to prayer, visitation, education, etc., which are actually uh, rights for any prisoner in any system in the world. Though the prisoners are stripped of their freedom, but they are not stripped of their other rights. But this fascist Israeli government wanted to strip those prisoners even of their humanity and to crush the spirit of resistance to this occupation or against this government, which wanted to put an end to the Palestinian presence. And there were so many struggles and efforts made by those prisoners who have lost many of those rights in a matter of months. And this was a bargaining chip or a method to put pressure on the leaders of resistance. And it was one of the causes why we had the 7th of October or the Al-Aqsa flood. That's why they had the slogan, everybody for everybody. In other words, the Israeli prisoners, particularly the soldiers, uh, where it was proposed that they would be swapped or exchanged for the Palestinian prisoners, because Palestinians have tried all other means in order to alleviate the suffering of prisoners in Israeli prisons, and they have failed. We should remind everybody that in the Oslo Accords, which were signed by the PLO, which is considered the representative of the Palestinian people, and in which it surrendered about 78% of the rights of Palestinians. Part of those accords was that all Palestinian prisoners be released, and this did not happen. The Israelis did not commit even to those accords, even in which they have the upper hand and they are the winners in terms of recognition and political status. So the resistance and the Palestinian people and the Palestinian politicians and the official circles tried to work on those issues, but they have always failed. And the Palestinian prisoners were not freed, and they had their legitimate right to resist and to refuse that aggression. This is an inalienable right granted not only by the international law and international legitimacy, or international resolutions and United Nations resolutions. Let me remind everybody that we have a resolution which was issued in 1964, i.e. before the 1967 war, talking about the right of the Palestinians to resist occupation and their right of return. And it wasn't a general resolution about the right of all people to resist occupation, but it was specific to the Palestinian people to use all means to gain their freedom, including the armed resistance. And this was approved by the international community, which means that the Palestinian people who are being tortured, whose lands are occupied, who are subject to atrocities, have the right to defend themselves. Nonetheless, historically, there has been no way of freeing prisoners unless through exchanges. It started in 1985 where they swapped around 1,500 prisoners, Palestinian prisoners. And it also happened with Hezbollah at more than one occasion, and it was also the case in 2011 with the Shalit um, uh, a prisoner exchange, including women and children, in the dozens actually. Those children are arrested, imprisoned, tortured, humiliated, and stripped of their humanity. They are mere 13 or 15 year olds. We're talking about degrading of human dignity by all means at a physical, psychological, social, familial levels. All of this takes place and the world does nothing. And this sense that the Zionists have, that they can do what they may and no one would hold them to account, it necessitated that the resistance takes the initiative and uses means that would deter the Zionists and liberate those prisoners. Hence, the Israeli prisoners and seeking the prisoner exchange. However, now we are before a new formula. This government, a fascist government, is not concerned about the prisoners. We see it using this issue in order to fulfill its own political gains, including the attempt to evacuate Gaza in order to solve the demographic threat it constitutes. What does that mean? The Oslo Accord and the Oslo process came to solve an issue which the world saw or regarded as something that can be solved through a two-state solution. In other words, the Palestinians would recognize that the 78% of the territory of Palestine can be given to Israel, while the Palestinians would take about 22%. And this is what they call the two-state solution. In other words, the Israelis would have a territory and we will be recognized and they can claim to be a democratic state with a Jewish majority. But they are not concerned with that. They're not keen on fulfilling that because the Zionist movement does not want to come to any solution that gives the Palestinians any existence, no matter how meager it is. It wants to uproot them. It wants to take control of all of the historical Palestine, actually beyond. They're talking about Jordan, Syria, Iraq, and potentially in the Arab Peninsula. This is the nature of the Zionist ideology. They take and swallow the territories and they settle and expand their settlements, and then they move one step after the other. So they refused the two-state solution and the so-called one-state solution, which indicated that Palestinians would be given equal state status and rights as Israeli citizens because they are supremacists and they would not accept giving Palestinians equal rights. So they lived over the past 30 years in an apartheid state or an apartheid system. The world was warning the Israelis that this is what they are doing. And so at the end of the Obama term of office in 2015, when in the Security Council there was a vote on the condemnation of settlements in the West Bank that is taking over the territories that are supposedly to be given to Palestinians. John Kerry, the Secretary of State at the time, said that the time for a two-state solution is over because of the stubbornness of the Israelis. So this train has taken off and it will not come back. So what we are looking at is an apartheid state that cannot be accepted by the world. The Israelis the Zionists have chosen to uh, persist as a pure Jewish state. So however, the Palestinians are more than half the population between the river and the sea, and the world cannot ignore them anymore, just like they could not ignore what happened in South Africa. So the Aqsa flood came as a pretext for the Israelis to solve that demographic threat through genocide. Nonetheless, we would say that the persistence and steadfastness of the resistance and the Palestinian constituency in Gaza has failed that scheme, as many of the presumptions made by the Israelis in this conflict have been undermined and failed. And this is beyond the scope of this seminar here, but it is important to recognize that the situation we are facing now is shifting quite rapidly from what we had previously. And this includes what happens in Israeli prisons. We said, as our speakers have said, that are unprecedented. There has always been torture, but the magnitude is unprecedented. There would be some cases of rape, but now the scale is unprecedented. So we are coming to a point where the title prisoners is essential and very important, because this does not only have repercussions at a political level, but also at a legal and humanitarian level. We are talking about a state, not only a rogue state, but a state that has given up on all human and moral values that can be claimed or must be claimed by any regime in the world. And the world cannot look the other way. It is just too obvious to be ignored. Palestine has now become the epicenter and the icon of liberty and justice on the one hand versus injustice and darkness on the other. So those who stand with the Zionism, they have lost all ethics and all morality and standing. This is what represents what happens now. Best is what happens in prisons, in the Israeli prisons. So to conclude, when we talk about the political repercussions or implications of the issue of Palestinian prisoners, we must put it in this sense. Yes, it is a humanitarian and moral issue, but it is also a political issue, or has a political dimension. So those negotiations must end to reach the liberation of those prisoners, or most of them at least. So the steadfastness of the constituency and of the resistance and the support that must be given by all the free people of the world must continue, and in support of the Palestinian right against the Israeli injustice. Thank you so much, Dr. Sami. Thank you so much, Dr. Sami, for this intervention. I have three questions. Each speaker, Mr. Osama, you talked about that other friendly states like Turkey can do for Israeli prison or Palestinian prisoners, and You provided some recommendations from 1 to 7. I believe they need some way of implementation. The final one is related to embassies and boycotting the cultural, social, and political activities. This may be clear, but the recommendations are from 1 to 7. What mechanisms would you propose for their implementation? And Dr. Sami, finally, you said that after 2003, there has been a decline in the moral status of the United States, and I believe that this precludes or is usually the starting point of the decline of states. But the cover that the United States is offering for Israel also undermines its moral standing. So would you propose certain ways to work to expose this immoral stance by the United States vis-a-vis the Israeli atrocities?
We see accurately of however, there is a peculiarity about the issue of prisoners, and talking about this through this legal lobby can support or can be supported by the largest number of testimonies that we collect. So it is important to have an international legal network to cross-check information and to get as much information as possible. And so, for example, we are communicating with some groups in order to file some file lawsuits against the criminals. So we need to have a collaborated and coordinated effort for the human rights and the Palestinian prisoners, because right now the Palestinian prisoners, we are talking about over 7,000 administrative detainees, including academics, students, women, and children. So we are talking about the elites of the Palestinian community that are detained, in addition to the leaders of the struggle in this side. And we are also talking about over 300 prisoners who are sentenced to a lifetime in a prison. So, so there should be a formal body that can protect or defend their rights. So of course, we appreciate South Africa in its initiative to file a lawsuit in the international court, but we always wished to have an Islamic or Arab movement or initiative to do that. But anyway, before the South Africa, but anyway, it happened this way. In terms of the recommendations, well, the recommendations or the recommendations that I made in my paper, they are easy to be conducted in reality. So, for example, we are talking today about the European Union and a regional a group. It has a major role in the establishment of the International Criminal Court. Torture lies under the umbrella of the international crimes that that takes place. So we need to hold to account anybody who are involved in torture. So all of these testimonies that we have collected from people who came out of a prison, and until now, no, there have been no record or any document that has been issued by the ICC against Ben Gvir or against those who are involved in these crimes. So we need to take actual steps by European countries or others, whether Islamic countries or others, against this occupation. For example, one of the recommendations is to stop relations. This recommendation was issued by the ICC or by the International Court of Justice. So the ICJ demanded the countries of the world to stop all relations with the occupation. So to stop those political relations or others, because not only torture that is taking place, the genocide that is taking place in the Gaza Strip should stop now. So there should be pressure in order to do that. And it is really strange, all of this silence that is taking place in the international community and preventing international organizations to visit or see the prisons. So in all of these crimes and this hell that the Palestinian prisoners are living in the Israeli prisons. So the mechanisms are clear. And if there is will, this can take place actually in order to stop this genocide in Gaza. In terms of the situation in the United States, it seems that the American empire tells the world that it represents the values of civilization, the values of the world that are based on the values of freedom, the democracy, etc., and the rights to peace and the right to having human rights and the values of democracy, liberalism, etc. But what we have seen in the flood of Al-Aqsa is the collapse of all of these narratives, because what we see today in the United States, for example, in universities, all those who are expressing their opinions about the Palestinian right, now they are being crushed, and they are considered to be part of the Palestinian force, although their voices are way lower than the voices of the Zionists and the Zionist lobby in the United States. This moral fall has began long ago, but however, we started to see it directly after the collapse of the Soviet Union and after the emergence of the phenomenon of Islamophobia, and showing that Islam is the enemy that emerged after the fall of the collapse of the Soviet Union or communism. So this issue started in slow steps in the 90s, and then it took larger steps after 9/11, and we have seen the implications of that in Afghanistan and Iraq. But what happened after the flood has gone beyond all of this. I have lived at that period, and I have seen how some issues or some laws have been used to be politicized in this issue, and there is still some kind of shyness that there should be a crime in order to prosecute somebody, although they are trying to put pressure on people through their relations in order to push or silence their political positions, but they are using laws. But now, even in this, we have seen, for example, the Turkish student who wrote an article who just said to stop the genocide, so she was targeted and she was put in prison, and even before discussing her dissertation, she was not allowed to do that 2 months before discussing her dissertation. So we have seen so many people who lost their jobs just because they are practicing their constitutional right of expressing their opinion. So this is a kind of moral collapse, and a kind of collapse that will lead to the collapse of this civilization. We can also see thousands of people who are trying to face this. So this is the situation in the American Empire, and this is a situation that is taking place between the capitalists and the Zionists who have influence, and others who are trying to save that community. Here I'm talking about a conflict or a dispute between social groups within the American society that can affect a huge change. So there will either be a huge collapse of the civilization after all of these years at this power, uh, if this power was able to achieve their goals, or there will be a new movement in the community, and those forces in the community that reject such violations to their constitutional rights and the human rights. So there will be a huge change. So this is very important, and I believe in 2 or 3 years things will be clearer. Who is going to have more space in the American society? Whether universities are going to confront this infringement on the academic freedom, or are they going to be under this pressure? Because we see that some universities are here and some of them are there. So the situation now is better, because in the past the Zionist groups were hiding behind some of these issues and trying to achieve their goals without being exposed in this brutal image. But now things are clearer, and I believe I think things are not solved yet, and there are some forces that are facing this Zionist group, and I believe one day this will be reflected negatively on the perpetrator. Thank you very much. Now we can take some response, some comments, or some questions.
Does anyone have any question? Hello. This seminar has been very illuminating. My question is, what would be this turning point where we move from the point where we are aware of what happens for Palestinian prisoners to the point where we move or act about it using apart from those tools of action and activism that have been used for decades to no use? This is my first question. My second question: is it true that the American democracy may be eating up itself, and its empire is in collapse? And what do you believe is the empire that is going to follow? Because both candidates, be it China or Russia, do involve within also that moral lacking and support of evil. So where do we stand from this? Your first question. The problem is that we have an Israeli state that is not complying to any restraints, not even the ICC. They are trying to withdraw or evade all their obligations under international law and United Nations resolutions. The problem is greater than just the issue of Palestinian prisoners. It is a matter of attitude. They have the American cowboy attitude. They think they can bomb Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, Palestine, and no one would say a thing. But the most important thing is to focus on the humanitarian aspects. For example, the issue of women and children in prison, the issue of enforced disappearance, cases of administrative detention. These are issues that may be worked upon in international law and human rights organizations, and we should also do the legal work for lawsuits in international courts by collecting testimonies and documentation, etc. Although this is a long-term thing, but at some point justice is going to be fulfilled, and we know that the standing of Israel is in decline because the international community believes it is a rogue state now and that it runs against ethical and humanitarian values. So we may build on that, although it is an endeavor at the long term. Although there is some negligence of the issue of Palestinian prisoners and the Palestinian issue at large. There are two questions that our dear brother has posed. The first is it possible for the American system to reform itself? Would the American democracy have a remedy in order to recover? Of course, there are social forces within the American society who recognize the crisis in which the United States has put itself, and they are lobbying for to make a change. But the question would be how powerful they are and whether they would be able to effect such a change. I believe it is quite hard, but not impossible though. If we study the history of empires and their rise and demise, we will find that there are so many causes and factors and conditions at which those empires fall when they reach a certain point of loss of moral standing, where it would be very hard to recover the power and legitimacy they started out with. So many people who speak about this believe that this is not easy, it's quite hard, and that the forces that are causing the collapse of this empire are much stronger and bigger than those operating in the other direction. But at the same time, the United States is an unprecedented human experience. And its system would not allow also, although we have a central federal government, but there are also the governments of states. The American fall might not happen overnight. It takes a long time usually, and it is accompanied by the rise of other powers. There are no final thoughts on this. When we talk about the rise of China, Russia is much weaker, but Russia today is not the same as we had 20 years ago. But also, in terms of China, I believe that China, so far, although it doesn't have the same Western and American values, but it has a different system and system of governance that is authoritarian, but it is also capable of offering its population some stability at the political and social and economic levels, and also prosperity. And it's also not as aggressive as the West when it took control of the other parts of the world. The United States is less than 250 years old, and it has been involved in more than 200 wars, while China was involved in much fewer wars. So it doesn't have that colonial or warmonger history of wanting to take over the world. It uses the soft power through business, commerce, etc. And this is an economy. And this is a new form that we need to better understand at a strategic level. And it depends on two issues: the rapidity of the fall of the American system or state, and of course, Trump is doing a very good job in terms of accelerating that fall. But also to understand the alternative economic system that China is proposing. The dollar 20 years ago constituted more than 90% of financial transactions internationally. Now it is around 60%. So we have a rise of some competitors. So we need to better understand the new economic or financial world order, whether we will have a basket of currencies or or will we have two parallel financial systems, one dominated by the West and another that is more dominated by China? These are things that we will better understand in the next decade. What China or what the West is trying to do is to stop that Chinese train, which is working or moving towards achieving that objective. And at the same time, the situation of the so-called third world and the Islamic nation or Ummah, if it manages to make use of all the chances offered by the Aqsa flood, there are so many chances that have become opportune and have not been quite understood and grasped by all the Islamic elites unless those are taken to change how this part of the world is regarded. I will not say that they will offer an alternative, but they will uh, uh, come to a completely new standing. Palestine has become the epicenter and the turning point where all the existing standards and perspectives can be changed towards a change at the international system, towards a more a freer and more just world. Actually, when we talk about the issue of Palestinian prisoners, it is a humanitarian issue, and we must work in earnest in order to expose the practices of the occupation against Palestinian prisoners and taking active stances by all and positions by all international states, particularly Arab and Islamic and European states. I thank you so much for listening. Peace be upon you all. Assalamu alaikum. again, thank you so much for those words and those interventions. I believe it was quite beneficial, but the issue of prisoners requires further discussion, particularly that the Aqsa flood was mainly meant to liberate those prisoners. Thank you so much, and hope to meet you in future seminars as well. Thank you.